Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this week's Diving Deeper. As you can see, I'm here with Pastor Dave. Pastor Dave, good to see you.
Good to be here with you, Ernie, and everybody else.
Last week, we started our new sermon series about, the foundational members of the Methodism faith, or the Methodist faith, I should say. And we took a look at Susanna, and now we're taking a look at the man himself, John Wesley, today. And I like the title. It's a bit of a mouthful for your sermon, but we're
Yes.
talking about grace, and specifically the title of the sermon was The Gift of Grace That Woos, Welcomes, and Perfects Us. Um, and during that sermon, one of the things that you touched on that I think is really worth unpacking is this concept of, you know, grace being sneaky as it permeates our life, as we go on. And so my question to you would be, how and where has that sneaky grace been working in your life?
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting way, maybe a funny way to think about how God works. We talk about God working in hidden ways, or sometimes we like to think from biblical imagery of God working in more straightforward ways or in powerful ways. God is always powerful, but God is also subtle, and I like to think of how this idea of grace, this unconditional love of God, this undeserved love of God, and maybe unexpected love of God that shows up in our lives. It can sneak into the cracks in our lives. It can find a way inside of us when we are not expecting it, when we're drifting or wandering away from God, or in those moments when we are feeling especially distant from God, or confused, or feeling terrible about ourselves. We have all had those moments work on us in life. I've shared before how I'd gone through years ago the experience of divorce, and it was a low spot for me. And
Hmm.
it was one of those places I discovered how God's grace kept showing up for me, particularly when I felt just really ashamed of what had happened to me, and that I had let a lot of people down, had let
Mm.
my spouse down, had let my family and kids down, let the church down. And yet God kept finding ways to come and to lift me up, sending people into my lives, or sending some hopefulness into me, so that I didn't have to stay in the abyss all the time. And so I just think God finds those sneaky ways to love us, to lift us up, to bring us back in relationship with God, and to not leave us where we are. Um,
Sure.
because I think this is the love that works to change us. And the idea of God wooing us, if you've ever had somebody who wooed you, who wanted you, who was trying to attract you and get your attention, that's what God is always
Right.
doing with us. I like the author who put it one way. He said, God is a fisherman whose lure is grace. And grace is that lure that catches our spiritual attention, our emotional attention, our imagination, our hopefulness, and brings us back closer to God.
No, that's a really good way of putting it. I like the quote that you just shared there as well about grace being the lure. I think I've learned one of my favorite authors is Max Lucado, in pastors as well. But one of his books, In the Grip of Grace, is one that I really enjoy and kind of have that ongoing mentality, especially like what you were saying about, when you go through different patches of life. And it doesn't have to be something super severe or anything. You just have those
Right,
days, right?
right.
And it's good to me, that God has shown that, you're still in that grip of grace, his grip of grace, and
Yes,
I think it kind of crosses over where, you only fully get it when you're out of it and you look back and you see,
right.
how God's grace works in your life, and in a lot of cases, worked things out for the better than you possibly could have imagined. And so, um, grace is, I think it's a good thing that you put it that way about how it's sneaky. It's a little tricky, grace
Yes,
is, but
yes.
we're lucky to have it, and it's what
Yeah.
makes our faith go around is having that grace bestowed on us.
And
Um,
and and maybe when a grace is sneaky, it surprises us in
mhm,
really good ways.
sure.
And we all need those good surprises from time to time.
Very true. One of the other interesting things that you posited this morning was talking about God's love being a risky kind of love. And why don't you go ahead and expand on that? Because that definitely made me sit back for a second when I heard that about it being risky.
Sure. Yeah, it's the idea that I think both that God takes risks in loving us. God doesn't always know, I don't think, how we're going to respond. We don't always know how we're going to respond to God's love, to this wonderful grace in our lives. But God is betting on us, so to speak. You know, God takes the risk of loving us and bringing us into a relationship so that we can respond in faithful ways. And sometimes we do that well, and other times we just blow it. Other times we continue to ignore what God is saying to us, and we disappoint God. But it's also, I think, part of that invitation from God, or that willingness of God to take risks on us, is to help us to take risks in loving other people. and
Right.
and and we've all had this experience, and God needs us to take those risks. There may be people in our lives that show up, and other folks are like, oh, that person is just going to drag you down. That person is so needy, they need so much, stay away from them. But maybe that person needs some love that you have to offer, needs you to be able to see something in them that will help them to be able to turn a corner, or to keep going when they're especially down. I think of the massive problems we have in our society right now, the divisiveness, and how polarized we get. And so, loving someone who is very different from you is a risk, because
Sure.
they may not respond well to it, but we make that witness of love. We say, I still care about you even though your views are diametrically opposed from mine. Or we label folks and deem them unworthy all the time. Like we keep doing that with people who are immigrants.
Mm,
And
mm,
there's so much migration that happens in our world now for a whole lot of reasons. But these are people that God calls us to love, and so we have to figure out how to love them. And to take that risk of love. People who other folks say are just unacceptable, or
mm,
people who we say, that they're not folks who are like me. But Jesus didn't make that distinction. Jesus took risks of loving people who were very different from him, people who were considered unacceptable, people who were considered not good people. And
mm,
and Jesus loved people like Judas, who did turn on him. But Jesus didn't hesitate.
mhm.
He didn't make the decision to say, well, I love this guy a little bit, but only going to give him one chance, kind of a thing. And so there's something about being willing to take risks of love and not to be cautious. But
Sure.
let's be people who are willing to love the way that Jesus loved, even in uncomfortable settings where we know we're putting ourselves out there.
Well, hearing what you just said, I'm definitely glad that, God isn't a one and doneer with us, gives us
Right.
that one
Yes.
chance. But I was also noting that how the corollary between, you know, extending grace can be risky at times for
Yes.
us on a personal level. And so just that correlation between the two, I think it's good that you hit on those in your sermon, those two concepts. I know you were talking more about grace being sneaky and loving being risky, but they do intermingle in certain points in your life. So, and I think they complement each
Precisely.
other as well,
Yeah, yeah, it's and that's a distinctive part of our tradition here in Methodism. How we are encouraged to embrace that gift of grace, to see how it works, to try it on for size ourselves, to share it.
Right, right. So, well, this was a great conversation as usual, Pastor Dave. I know that we are going to be taking a break from the Wesley sermon series next week, where Pastor Joe Gaucher is going to be the special guest speaking on Pentecost Sunday. But we will pick it right back up the first Sunday in June. And I believe we're doing another one about John, and then we will get to Charles.
Yeah, we'll keep moving. Moving both backwards and forwards.
That's great. That's great. And I am noticing here something that's happening. It looked like Max Headroom there for a second.
Yeah, you got the
vibrating
tremors
head.
there.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, you all bear with me. I'm, with the little computer hiccup there. But all of this said, again, it's been great talking to you, Pastor Dave, and talking with all of you. And we hope you have a great week, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.